but I'm one of these rare bird gastroenterologists that says, I don't want to do only colonoscopies, I want to take care of the whole person. And so therefore I do primary care, and that's what our dedicated senior center is all about, is primary care medicine. So one of the main things that we see when we take care of people is diabetes. And we'll go to the next slide here, if we could, please. Well, there we go. Is this working? Anybody back there? Yeah. Next slide. There we go. No? Okay, so in the senior population, diabetes is a really prevalent condition. And as you can see, about 25% or more of the people in the United States have diabetes in this age group, in our seniors. That means we have almost 12 million people in the senior age group that have diabetes. So let's first define diabetes. Those of you may know that there's actually two types of diabetes. There's type 1 and type 2. Type 1 are those that we used to call child onset or juvenile onset diabetes, mostly in children, adolescents, but even 20s and 30s can have diagnosed with type 1. These are people who do not make insulin. And there's actually a blood test that we do called the C-reactive protein, that a C-peptide, that we can measure in people's bloodstream to see if they're actually making the insulin or not. So I'm going to put those aside because they're not really affected into the seniors until they age, but these are people that are totally dependent on insulin. The type 2, the vast more common kind of diabetes, is really something that's related to insulin resistance. You make insulin, but the insulin that you make from your pancreas does not work properly to get into the cells to drive the sugars down. So, what's the definition of diabetes? It's changed over the years by the numbers values. We used to, in the old days, when I was in training, we would do what's called the glucose tolerance test. You would drink this syrupy, sugary stuff, and they would do a blood sugar 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes, 2 hours, up to 6 hours, and we would mark to see how high the blood sugar would get and then how it would come down. You never see that done anymore. Then we did 2-hour postprandial blood sugars, meaning 2 hours after a meal. And what would your blood sugar be? If it was greater than 140, you probably had diabetes. But now we use fasting blood sugar and another test we call hemoglobin A1C. A1C, as you probably see advertised on television. So a fasting blood sugar means you don't eat or drink, say, after midnight. If you're going to do the test, you can have water, you can have pills, you can have black coffee, no sugar, no cream, nothing else, and you go get a fasting blood test that's about from midnight on. And if your blood sugar is greater than 100, by definition, you have diabetes. Now, I will tell you that not too many years ago, that value was 120. Then they marched it down to 110, and for many years it was 105, and now we're at 100, meaning that we're detecting diabetes in people who just 5 or 6, 10 years ago would not have been classified as diabetes. And the reason why that's been done is because we see that people who have those values actually can develop the complications of diabetes. The other test that we now use, and has been approved by the FDA, is the hemoglobin A1C. This test came into development back in the 1980s, and it's a really cool test. There's no fasting, it is a blood test, and what it is, it's a measure of what's called glycohemoglobin. So hemoglobin is the thing that makes your red blood cells red, all right? So we do know that red blood cells made in the bone marrow last for about 90 days. And so scientists came up with this very fancy algorithm that could actually measure the percentage of blood sugar that's attached to the red blood cell molecule. All cells have some sugar attached to its membrane, and that's what this test can measure. And if we know that the average red blood cell lasts for 90 days, that if you have a hemoglobin A1C of 5.5, which is the upper limit of normal, that your blood sugars are probably less than 100 on average fasting. However, the more that hemoglobin A1C goes up, the closer you get to diabetes. So we say from 5.6 to 5.9, you have what's called pre-diabetes, the tendency to develop. Not a classic definition of diabetes, but your tendency is getting close there. After 6.0, you have frank, true diabetes. So we measure the test in diabetics, usually about every 3 months or so. and we follow the trend. If your A1C is coming down, let's say you were at 10 when you were first diagnosed, and you got put on medications, and you do the exercise, and the weight loss, et cetera, and the proper diet, and we monitor maybe 3 months later, we'll do that A1C again. Okay, it went from 10, now it's down to 8, and we're trying to get you down to less than 7. We're not going for like optimal 5.5. We're going for less than 7. That's what most doctors look for to get your A1C down to. And when we say that your A1C is less than 7.0, then you're doing pretty good on your diabetes. So let me get to the next stage here. Next slide. So, diabetes, we teach our patients, can affect virtually every single organ system and every single cell of your body. Okay, sugars is used for energy. But when you have too much sugar, it causes damage. It causes damage in many ways. And I will also stop and say that diabetes is not just a blood sugar value. Diabetes is also a disease of blood vessels, particularly the eye and the kidneys. So we know that people who have chronic kidney disease with diabetes usually have not as good a prognosis, and we really optimally control their blood sugar as much as possible. The kidney blood vessels are very similar to the blood vessels in the back of the eye. And if you know anything about diabetes and eye care, it is the leading cause of blindness in this country. The leading cause. It's also the leading cause of renal failure, chronic kidney disease, end-stage renal disease in the United States. You go into a dialysis center, and I would wager that the majority of people in there are diabetics and likely have hypertension as well. So, but can it affect your blood vessels, the bigger ones, like in your brain, in your heart? Others, of course it can. All right? It affects the nerves. You might have heard of diabetic peripheral neuropathy because the nerves also have blood vessels. All right? And the vessels themselves have blood vessels. Those are called the vasa vasorum. So, can we go back, please, on the slide? So, gum disease, periodontal disease, diabetics often have more dental infections, not just dental caries, but disease of the gums, for example. The neuropathy, I mentioned in the legs, it also can happen in the arms and hands. The feet, I mentioned the neuropathy. The brain, cerebrovascular disease. So diabetes accelerates atherosclerosis, the hardening of the arteries, if you will. And that, together with high cholesterol and hypertension and diabetes, not a good combination. In fact, about 20, 25 years ago, cardiologists came up with this term that they called Syndrome X, now called the metabolic syndrome. All right, and what the metabolic syndrome is, if you have 3 of the following 5 conditions I'm going to mention, you have metabolic syndrome. It's not one disease, it's a conglomeration of conditions, and if you have 3 of these conditions, you are at higher risk for cardiovascular disease. So what are those 5 conditions? It is diabetes, by the definition that I spoke earlier. It is high triglyceride, a fat in your system, not cholesterol, but triglyceride. When we do a lipid panel, meaning a cholesterol check, we usually get a cholesterol, a triglyceride, your HDL, and the LDL cholesterol, right? The LDL is the bad cholesterol, the HDL is the good cholesterol. HDL cleanses the blood vessels of atheromas, meaning plaque deposits from cholesterol. The LDL, low density lipoprotein, is the bad one. The HDL is the good one, right? So they don't measure those. We use the triglyceride, which is fat, all right? It's actually fat. I used to do lectures for medical students, and I used to put up a fat cell on a PowerPoint presentation, and it was a big cell, and those of you who remember your high school biology, there'd be usually a nucleus in the middle, and there would be that fluid around the nucleus, and then there was the membrane. Well, the triglyceride fat cell is all yellow, and the nucleus is actually squished to the side. Pretty impressive to show that to medical students, all right? And if you look at fat in the body, if you were to see one doing a surgery, it's yellow, actually, right? So diabetes affects can affect every single organ system that we have. Next slide, please. So what do we need to do to take steps to control our diabetes? This is a favorite subject of physicians, but unfortunately, I'm afraid to say, I think most physicians don't spend enough time educating their patients what diabetes is, how we control it, how to take medicines properly, et cetera, et cetera. They leave that to others, dietary therapists, nurse practitioners, nurses, others. I will tell you that in our center, because we see our patients so frequently, every physician is so knowledgeable about diabetes that we spend much of our time educating our diabetic patients about their condition, not only how we control it, how we treat it, what are the options for therapy, et cetera, but also to go into proper diets. And I want to stop for a minute and talk about diet. Okay? Oh, let me go back to the metabolic syndrome, because I didn't mention all 5 things. Hypertension is one of those 5 things I mentioned. Waist circumference, greater than 40 inches in a man, greater than 36 inches in a woman. Right? So, diabetes, high triglyceride, hypertension, increased waist circumference, and the obesity, which we define as a BMI of greater than 30. BMI means body mass index. So if you have 3 of those 5 things, even if you don't have the diabetes part of it, you have increased risk for heart disease. And we concentrate on those 5 things. We look and detect and treat what we call high-risk conditions. And they are some of those conditions I just mentioned. And we concentrate on those things, not to mention the people's other health conditions, whether it be heart or breathing, et cetera. But those are the 5 things that we really concentrate because we know that people who have metabolic syndrome, especially if they're diabetics, have a higher incidence of developing heart disease. So, if you're a diabetic, we ask our patients, every single one of them, to check your blood sugars regularly. Not once a week, not a couple times a week, every day. And in the old days, I would say, we used to have our patients check 4 times a day because we had different kind of medicines back then. But now we have some pretty darn good medicines, and we teach our patients to do at least in the morning before they eat breakfast. But I personally like to ask my patients to check their blood sugar in the evening hour before they eat their evening meal. And the reason why I do that is 2 reasons. One, it helps me decide how to adjust their medication, even if they're not on insulin. And second, and this is the most important part, I think, it shows the individual who's checking their blood sugar when it's like 180 or 200 before they eat the dinner meal, and they go, oh, gee, maybe I shouldn't have had that extra serving of pasta earlier today. Because the thing that we really want to stay away from, folks, besides the sweets, are the carbs, the starches, right? Pasta, white rice, potatoes, okay? Those are the things we really want to watch out for. And bread. Let's talk about bread for just a second. Not too many years ago, almost every single loaf of bread in the United States had what's called high fructose corn syrup. Package of Wonder Bread, whatever you want to get, I'm telling you it's got high fructose corn syrup. Then the food industry started realizing, okay, high fructose corn syrup, not good news. High fructose corn syrup, folks, is in so many things. It is in salad dressing. It's in ketchup, all right? I come from Missouri, big state for growing corn, next door to Illinois, Iowa. If you fly over those areas or drive through, all you see are cornfields. So what do you think? You think we're eating corn on the cob all the time over there? No, we're making that corn into biofuels. And Archer Daniels Midland, based in Decatur, Illinois, sells about $3 billion of high fructose corn syrup every year because they take that corn and they make it into a syrup called high fructose corn syrup. Fructose is a sugar, folks, just like dextrose, etc. It is a sugar, and it elevates your blood sugar. So the food industry got smart and said, you know what, we're going to start packaging our stuff and say no high fructose corn syrup. I give them the credit for that. Talking about bread, though, we recommend whole grain breads. Okay, not whole wheat, whole grain breads. If you're going to eat pasta, eat the green pasta. Much healthier for you, right? If you're going to have a potato, it sounds contradictory, but sweet potatoes are better than regular potatoes. If you're going to eat rice, eat brown rice, much healthier for you. Okay? So you are literally what you eat. Going back to the high fructose corn syrup, Coca-Cola back in the 1980s, if you remember, they came out with New Coke. Didn't go over too well. But also back then, they decided to reformulate how they made their sodas, their Coca-Colas. And they thought that was too expensive to get sugar, so they went to ADM, Archer Daniels Midland, and said, we want to buy tons and tons and tons of high fructose corn syrup. So now every single can or bottle of Coca-Cola and most of the sodas, the drinks in the United States, have high fructose corn syrup. About half of what Archer Daniels sells goes to Mexico, if you can believe that or not. It's crazy because they have high incidence. A lot of Hispanic people have a high incidence of diabetes. Some of it's genetic, but some of it's the dietary habits. And a lot of it's from the high fructose corn syrup. So we teach our patients to eat healthy with those food groups I mentioned, the green pasta, the sweet potatoes, the whole grain breads, and I would recommend not more than 2 slices of bread a day if you're a diabetic. Okay. Interesting, other thing that we tell people to do to control their sugars are diet and exercise coupled together. I often ask my patients, eat breakfast, take your medicine, take your blood sugar before you eat and after. You're going to see a little rise, but then go walk for 30 minutes. Spend some energy. Come back, check your blood sugar. It's going to drop 30, 40, 50 points sometimes, depending how vigorous you exercise. Regular exercise lowers blood sugar. And if you do it on a regular basis, your blood sugar stays better. All right? And the reason why is because your muscles need energy when they expend themselves. And they use this by a condition that's called glycogenolysis. I mean, it breaks down sugar that is stored, all right, for energy. But if you don't exercise, that glycogenolysis doesn't happen. And so the liver, where your sugar goes to that you eat, all right, goes to your liver, and your liver says, I don't need this. What am I going to do with it? All right? The muscles in my body aren't needing any more energy right now because the person I'm inside of right now, the liver says, isn't expending energy. So I'm going to store this energy source, meaning the sugar, for future use. The problem is the liver makes it into fat. Remember the triglyceride I mentioned? That's what it does. It makes it into triglyceride and fat, like this. I don't know about you folks, but during the COVID last 2 years, I've gained about 15 pounds because I've not been exercising like I used to. So exercise, extremely, extremely important. Lifestyle management changes, extremely important for controlling your blood sugar. And next slide, please. So taking medicine every single day for your diabetes, whether you're on insulin or not, is so important. And I'll talk a little bit about medicines. The number one oral, meaning by mouth medication that we have to treat diabetes is metformin. The brand name used to be called Glucophage. Okay, it comes in about 3 different sizes. It works by enhancing the ability of your body to take the sugar that's in there that you ate and put it where it's supposed to be, and lowers your blood sugar that way. So that's our number one treatment. Now, metformin doesn't come without some side effects, as almost every single drug. I tell every one of my patients, every single one of the medicines that we prescribe has potential side effects. Drugs can be two-edged swords. Metformin is tolerated pretty well. The most common side effect we see from metformin, however, is bowel problems, constipation in some people, and diarrhea in other people. Some people get bloated and gas. I would tell you that less than 10% of the people that I ever put metformin as part of their regimen cannot tolerate it. It's a very, very good drug. And now that it's a generic, it's a lot less expensive as well. So what else? We use other oral hypoglycemic agents, and there's tons of them out there in the market now. And they all work in various ways of helping you utilize your own insulin. Because remember, a person who has a type 2 diabetes does not utilize their insulin properly, doesn't get into the cells to work properly. Some of the newer medications actually help your pancreas kick out more insulin, okay? And so we have such an armamentarium. We have so many tools now to treat diabetes. But the number one tool we have is education, in my opinion. We need to teach our patients, and I'm going to tell you, we need to teach the food industry to stop killing us with the diseases that they're causing. A little history about sugar. Does anybody here know when sugar became part of westernized diet? Anybody have a guess? The people, when humans started coming out of Africa 200,000 years ago, let's say, do you think they were eating sugar? No, they didn't know what sugar was. Sugar actually started in the Pacific in Papua New Guinea. And that's why Hawaii, so close to there, pure cane sugar from Hawaii, right? So then it went to India. And India, about 5,000 years ago, started actually growing sugar. It went to China. And it didn't do much in the Western world until about, believe it or not, 600, 700 years ago. So that's how long sugar has been part of our regular Western diet. We all have sweet tooth. Cleopatra did not use sugar. Cleopatra used honey, which was the main source of sweetness for people back in those days, right? So good old Marco Polo went east and he brought sugar cane back with him, and he went to the Mediterranean, and they started growing it on some of the islands there in parts of North Africa, and it became a huge crop. And then when civilization moved to the Americas, meaning North and South America, they brought sugar cane with them, all right? And we started growing it here too, Caribbean, Cuba, big sugar manufacturers, right? Sugar, 10,000 years ago, was actually used as fodder for pigs, they believe. And some human probably took a sugar cane and started chewing on it and go, wow, this tastes pretty good. No wonder the pigs like it, okay? So sugar has not been part of our diet. And I will tell you that sugar is an inflammatory condition that causes it. Sugar raises the inflammation in your body. And inflammation is not good for your body. In the last 10, 12, 15 years or so, we have recognized that chronic inflammation advances so many health conditions. It increases the risk for heart disease. It increases the risk for cancer, the atherosclerosis, okay? Sugar is not good. Eat less sugar, folks. So I have to tell you, I was at a place like this a week or so ago, and I went to the vending machines there. And I looked at the vending machine, and I saw like about 8 different kinds of soda. One of them was a diet soda. And then there was candy. Even the almonds were heavily salted in there. There was not one healthy thing in that vending machine. This is what the food industry is doing to us. They're killing us. They really are. So sugar, my advice is try to use the absolute least amount, and that means in the sweets, if you're going to cookies and candy and bakery products like pies and cakes. We tell our diabetics not to do that, but I'm telling you, everybody should really cut down the amount of sugar they take because it goes here, all right? It goes to your liver, and your liver, if you're not expending the energy, and it's going to make it into fat. And fat is bad because fat increases the inflammation in your body. And we can measure the inflammation in the body with a very cool blood test. It's called the CRP, the C-reactive protein. All right? Cardiologists use a subset of CRP called HS, or heart-sensitive CRP. And they said, oh, this person has a higher risk of developing heart disease, meaning blockage of arteries, because he has a high HS-CRP. If you took a person who weighs 135 pounds and stands 5'9", and you take another person who weighs 210 pounds and is 5'9", all right? I will guarantee you that the person who weighs 200 pounds is going to have a much higher CRP than that thin person because fat breeds inflammation. Inflammation causes disease, cancer, heart disease, kidney disease, eye disease. There's great books out there about reducing the amount of sugar and how it affects us. One is You on a Diet. You ever seen that book? It's a really cool book. I really recommend it to you folks. You on a Diet. It talks about what I'm discussing here. So I want to go back to those 5 things that we mentioned about the metabolic syndrome. I mentioned waist circumference of 40 inches in a man and 36 in a woman, right? And so it's mostly belly fat. Belly fat's fat, and belly fat increases your CRP. So if you've got a waist circumference of 42 inches and you get it down to 34 inches, you lost 20, 30 pounds or more, your CRP is going to nosedive. And that inflammation in your body is now decreased. So it decreases your chance of developing those associated chronic diseases. Also helps increase the control of your blood sugars and your diabetes, therefore. All right, we talked about exercise. So the current recommendations are minimum 30 minutes a day for 5 days a week. I tell my patients, shoot for, especially if you're retired and you have more time, shoot for 60 minutes a day, 7 days a week. Sounds like a lot to some people, right? But actually, that's the ideal. That's what most cardiovascular physicians will shoot for, because you build up your cardiovascular fitness, you're using your muscles to the extreme, burning up that glycogen, that storage form of the sugar, so you're getting your heart in shape, you're reducing your weight, you're making your muscles use up all that extra sugar you have. But the minimum we want is 30 minutes a day. Now, do I say you have to go run 5 miles, be in a marathon, ride your bike 10 miles? No, you can do a stationary bicycle for 30 minutes. You can go walk around, okay? I don't mean driving on your golf cart, playing golf. I mean walking the golf course. It would be better, right? That's better exercise. So minimum 30 minutes a day. Minimum is the key word here, because if you can do more, that's fine. And guess what? You don't have to do it all at one time. You can do some of it in the morning, some of it in the afternoon. So if I tell my patients, I just can't do an hour a day. I said, you know what, go for a 30-minute walk in the morning. And I don't mean a gingerly little walk walking your dog, because your dog's going to stop about every 2 feet or so. You walk like you're walking on purpose someplace. You're trying to go at a pace, ideally, to try to walk 2 miles in 1 hour. That's a pretty good clip, if you can get to that. Now, I realize that many people can't do that because of arthritis in hips and back aches and so forth and so on. But that's what we shoot for, folks. If we could do that, we would reduce obesity in this country, because we have an epidemic of obesity. And along with the obesity that we have an epidemic of diabetes. What did I say? How many millions of people, seniors, have diabetes in this country? All right? So exercise, key thing to help reduce your sugars and help reduce your cardiovascular risk factors. All right, another thing that's underutilized that our doctors like to teach our patients is keep a food diary. Now, what do I mean by that? And I tried this myself because I like to practice what I preach. So for about a month, I had a little notebook that I carried around, and I wrote down every single thing I ate that day, every single thing. So now with smartphones and computers, we can keep track of calories. And you'd be surprised how you change your dietary habits if you start keeping track of what you ate. All right? It really works. And all these things that you see, like Noom and all these things they advertise on TV, that's basically what they're doing. They're controlling the amount of calories you take in by teaching you that, those 2 pieces of toast you had this morning, that was, 180 calories. A teaspoon of sugar you put in your coffee this morning, that's 60 calories there. So think about it. Keeping track of what you eat helps you realize where you could probably improve your dietary habits. And you don't have to go look up the calorie of every single thing. Although I'll tell you, there's free apps out there on your phone you can put now, or plenty of news in the computers where you can actually find how many calories you're taking in. And if you want to lose weight, you figure that the average person sitting in this audience right now probably uses 1,800 calories a day if you're a woman, and about 2,000, maybe 2,200 calories if you're a man, just to do what you're doing right now. Just subsisting on what you're doing. You start expending calories, meaning walking more, exercising more, you're burning up more calories. If you want to lose weight, we preach slow and steady wins the race. All these fad diets that you see advertised on TV and so forth are all fads, because what they basically do to people is cause what I call the yo-yo diet. Yo-yo diet means you do those things they ask you to do, you drop the weight, and all of a sudden you get kind of bored of that and your weight goes back up again. So it's a yo-yo. You go up and down, up and down, up and down, okay? What we want is not a steady decline of your weight, because that's nearly impossible, and I'll explain in a minute. What we want is what we call a stair-step decrease of your weight. So the body has its own thermostat, if you will. It regulates your metabolism. And what happens is, when the body realizes that you are now feeding it less calories, it starts to conserve the calories that you make, that you take in. He's not giving us food that we're used to having, so we're going to put some aside for future use in case we need that energy. So what happens is you lose weight the first few weeks perhaps, maybe, and then you're going to sit like this. That's when your thermostat has not been reset yet. Now, that's where people get discouraged. They go, oh, look, I lost 3, 4, 5 pounds, and I'm doing the same thing, but I'm not losing any more weight. I'm going to go back to the way I was. But what happens is they go back up again. We want a stair step. We want go down, stay steady maybe for a couple of weeks or so, and then you go down a little bit more. Then you go steady, then you go down a little bit more. That approach of weight loss, which is about 1 to 2, maybe 3 pounds a week, depending on how vigorous you exercise, is the best way to lose weight. The stair step down. It's not linear down, and we don't want to do yo-yo. We want to do stair steps. Because what happens is your body resets that thermostat to conserve the energy you're giving it, but then it realizes, oh, guess what? We can get by with this. Let's start burning up more of those calories that he's taking in. And then you'll go down again. And then you'll stay the same, then you'll go down again. And you'll stay the same, and you go down again. And if you do that for months and months and months at a time, you will lose weight. Because what's weight loss? Very simple. There's no magic pill. There's no magic things we can do. It is decreasing the amount of calories you take in, increase the amount of calories you're expending. That's the only secret to weight loss, folks. The only secret. Use up more calories and decrease the amount of calories you take in. But don't be discouraged when it doesn't go down fast. That's where people go back to their old habits. All right, we talked about balanced diet. I talked about the vending machine. It just gets me. There are healthy vending machines out now. You know, they have fruits and other things like that. And let's talk about fruit for just a second. So people say, well, I'm diabetic and I'm not supposed to eat fruit because fruit has sugar. Well, I will tell you the sugar that's in fruit is a much healthier sugar that's in high fructose corn syrup and sodas. So don't be afraid. There are two fruits I would warn you if you're a diabetic that you have to watch very carefully. That's watermelon and grapes. All right? They boost your blood sugar much higher than most other fruits. Colorful fruits are the best fruits. That's just like leafy green is good. Colorful fruits, raspberries, etc., blueberries, strawberries. Those colors in the fruit are the healthy things. They're called phytonutrients. And they act on that inflammation I talked about earlier. Because inflammation, it really is oxidation. Oxidation is rust. That's how steel rusts, it's oxidation. It's your body, when it's getting too much oxidation, the inflammation occurs, leading to the heart disease, the kidney disease, the eye disease, etc. It's very simple. This is not rocket science. This is not even medical science. This is nutrition science. Okay? So important, pick the right things. It is recommended by the CDC that the average American should eat what? They should eat 8 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. I would wager most of us don't do that. Okay? So less carbs, more fruit, more colorful fruit is the way to go. And the more colorful the fruit, the healthier it is. Don't be afraid about the natural sugar that's in apples and in oranges, et cetera, et cetera. It is sugar, and it may affect your blood sugar, but not to the degree like high fructose corn syrup I spoke earlier about. So important. Okay, alcohol. What's alcohol made out of? Well, if you're in Russia, it's made out of vodka. And here, okay. If you go to Tennessee and Kentucky, bourbon, what's that made out of? They make mash. All right? Alcohol is a carb, folks, and sugar sometimes too, right? Alcohol will raise your blood sugar like you won't believe. Go have a couple of drinks and go take your blood sugar, and I guarantee it's going to be high, or higher. So I'm not saying does not drink alcohol. I will tell you this, though, however, the current recommendations by the American Heart Association, okay, by my society, the Gastroenterologists Association, where we do nutrition, is not recommended. 0 alcohol is the way to go. I think most of us don't do that. Most of us like to have a little glass of red wine, except for dinner. So I'm not saying to not drink, but don't drink to excess. What's to excess? More than 2 drinks a man, not 2 doubles. 2 max. And for women, 1. Remember the liver I talked about? So the liver takes that alcohol and it makes it into sugar and it puts that fat in your body. You stop. I had a gentleman, this is God's truth, I had a gentleman who weighed 240 pounds 4 months ago when I first met him, and he had recently diagnosed with diabetes, he had peripheral neuropathy, and he said, oh my God, I drink 4 glasses of whiskey every night. I didn't say he was an alcoholic, but I think he drank to excess, okay? And so I gave him this lecture, which you're hearing right now, and I talked to him, and I really convinced him, let's try cutting out alcohol altogether. I am proud to say that man who I saw Monday of this week, in 4 months has lost 38 pounds, and the only thing he did was cut out his alcohol use. That's the only thing he did, all right? How many calories, empty calories, bad calories are in alcohol? Alcohol raises your blood sugar, and it can cause a lot of other issues. I'm a gastroenterologist, so I treat liver disease, but I will tell you, excess of alcohol raises your sugars and can cause a lot of other health issues. I'm not trying to be a party pooper here. I know today is a Green Day and St. Pat's. I'm Greek descent, by the way, and we have green feta cheese in our restaurant. And by the way, speaking of which, I had a lovely lady I used to take care of up in St. Louis when I was up there, and she was about 92 years old, from the old country, from Ireland. And the first thing I say, Mrs. O'Brady, how you doing today? And she would say, still on the green side of the grass, doctor. And so I loved that lady because she really had a healthy attitude towards life. This lady did plant-based diet before the term even existed. Because when I asked her, how did you stay so healthy for these 92 years? And she said, I never ate meat, I didn't drink, I didn't smoke, I eat salads, and I eat fruit. That's a plant-based diet, right? You hear so much of that right now, plant-based foods. I'm not saying vegan. Vegan is zero animal products, zero animal products. So plant-based can be Mediterranean diet. Mediterranean diet is predominantly plant-based diet, but they allow some animal protein in there. And of course in the Mediterranean, where this term came from, they grow their own chickens. They slaughter their own goats and sheep for eating, okay? And they exercise more. And the other trick to the Mediterranean diet is eating in a communal setting. When you sit by yourself in front of your TV and you eat, you tend to eat more. If you eat in a communal dining experience area, you tend to eat less and healthier. Not because you're afraid of what people are thinking of you, that's just part of it. So in the Mediterranean, there's a great book that came out early 2000s, about 20 years now. It's called The Scientific Basis of the Mediterranean Diet. And they talk about a whole chapter of just how people in the Mediterranean basin eat, okay? And I lived in Greece for 6 years, and I studied over there, and I worked in NATO hospitals over there. So I took care of people that were from Athens who basically ate westernized diet like we do here, and they have the same heart disease that we have here and cancers. But you go out to the islands or up in the mountains in the more rural areas, and they ate the way they ate 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 500 years ago. Think about it in our country. Think about how many diseases have propped up in the last 100 years that we never used to think about back in the old days. Not because we didn't know about it, because first we didn't know how to treat it. But when we were an agrarian society, we grew our own food. We had our own animals that we raised, that we ate, okay? And we ate healthier. But as we became westernized and moved to the cities and industrialized country, we started eating bad ways, folks. And the food industry's been right there to feed us into it. One time, some years ago, my very good friend had a steak restaurant, and we went to Kansas City to go look at the cattle that he was selling in his very high-end, expensive steak restaurant. I'll never forget flying over the stockyards where the cattle were, and these cattle were just gorging themselves, guess on what? Corn, all right? That's in the cattle feed. And it's that, in the nature's world, and the cattle are out, they're not eating corn, they're eating grass, okay? That corn is what marbleizes the meat and makes it taste good, but it's also what's causing the high fat content, and it's also what's causing diabetics, okay? It's really in heart disease. So corn-fed beef is really not a good beef. That's why you go to Whole Foods and you pay double the price for a steak, but it's actually a more natural way of how that cattle is eating, as opposed to the way most of us are. We're just stuffing our cattle with this corn feed and other things. It's just unhealthy. Looks good, tastes good, but unhealthy. All right, smoking. Remember I talked about CRP, the C-reactive protein, the inflammatory marker in the body? People who smoke have a high CRP. I could be skinny as hell, but if they smoke, it increases inflammation in the body, and it increases the CRP level that we can measure. It increases the rate of heart disease and other diseases. So smoking is really bad news whether you're a diabetic or not. But you add smoking to one of those other 3 of the 5 factors I mentioned, metabolic syndrome, you have a higher risk of heart disease. I like to tell about patient vignettes, and I'm going to tell you one about my brother who died at the age of 65. He had a heart attack at the age of 62. I'm sorry, at the age of 64. He was a 2-pack-a-day smoker, didn't have high cholesterol, didn't have diabetes, wasn't overweight, smoked like crazy though. He had a heart attack, was 2 months in the hospital from his very severe heart attack. They put a couple stents in his heart. He was 2 months in the hospital, a month on the ventilator in the ICU, and then went home. He was so weak, the doctors would not let him out of the house, all right? Guess what he did? The first thing he did when the doctor said, you can drive now. He got up, got in his car, drove to 7-Eleven, and bought a pack of cigarettes. He was dead a year later. I got pretty upset about it, and I talked to his cardiologist, the heart surgeon, and to his internal medicine doctor, and I said, what the hell happened? And all 3 of them told me exactly the same thing. Your brother went back to cigarette smoking. Cigarette smoking increases the inflammation in those arteries. Even though he had a bypass or a stent, that inflammation got kicked up again because of cigarette smoking. And if you're already overweight, and if you have diabetes, that's just adding more coffins, nails in the coffin, folks. Quit smoking. You're not going to meet a more anti-smoking doctor than this one here. So we counsel our patients how to quit smoking, and there's many, many ways to do it. I don't have a magic pill for that, but I'm telling you, if you smoke, stop smoking, increases your CRP, increases your inflammation, adds to those other conditions that you have: hypertension, heart disease, diabetes. Let's go to the next one. All right. Very important to stay in touch with your doctor. Okay, stay in touch. What does that mean? Make your regular appointments, keep your appointments. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Write them down. I encourage my patients, I got 20 minutes to spend with you today. Next time I'm going to spend 20 minutes with you again. But I want you to write down all your questions, all your concerns, anything you want to talk about. Make notes of it. Bring it with you. Don't be afraid to ask your doctor, folks. That's what they're there for. They are there to help educate you. I'm Greek. I told you, what's the Greek word for doctor? It's iatros. What does iatros mean in Greek? It means teacher. All right? Doctors in the old days, I'm talking about thousands of years, they were teachers. They didn't have the medicines we have now, but they taught patients how to live healthier lives. They really did, even a couple thousand years ago. So doctors need to be educators to guide you through your journey in life of how to get and stay healthy. But you know what? If they don't hear your concerns, if they don't hear what you want to talk about, they're just going to do what they got to do, write your prescription, see you later, see you next time, etc. Don't be afraid to ask. No question is too dumb. Okay? Don't rely on Dr. Google. Get to the doctor who's got the MBO behind his name. There's a lot of misinformation in Dr. Google. There's some good information, but there's a lot of not good information. Don't rely on that. I read on the internet. I can't tell you how many patients come in and say that. I read on the internet this. So we got to spend more time disproving the misinformation that goes out there. Okay? So don't be afraid. Talk to your doctor. Open up. Be honest what you feel. Okay? Stress. Another thing that increases inflammation in the body. This is a fairly recent development that we've learned. So what happens when you're stressed? You've all heard about the flight or fight syndrome, where like back in the old days, maybe 40,000 years ago, when we came out of Africa, let's say, and we were hunter-gatherers, and then we would get up against a lion, and your adrenaline starts kicking up, your heart rate goes faster, your breathing gets faster, right? Your blood vessels tighten up like this. They squeeze together to prepare you to fight or run. Well, that's what stress does. Mental stress, physical stress, causes increased things that float around your body, hormones and pseudohormones that actually increase the inflammation in your body. So stress is not good. And that's why things like yoga and Tai Chi, mindfulness, all these techniques for stress relief, it really helps. Will it help lower your blood sugar? Absolutely it will. Because if we reduce your stress, we reduce the inflammation, we reduce that CRP, and it'll actually help your blood sugars as well. Because one of the things that the body does when you're under stress, it kicks out more of that sugar that you've stored up. And it floats around, it's going to attach to that red blood cell, it's going to make your A1C go high. Okay? So relieving stress, and whether it be pharmacologically if we have to, yes, but the best stress is things like mindfulness, prayers. I used to teach medical students, and we would practice what's called mindfulness. And I would say, what do they mean by that? And I said, well, I call it visualization. I say, visualize yourself on a mountainside, it's green, there's a running stream, it's peaceful, it's quiet. And that just releases the body. They've actually done brainwave tests. They've done what's called PET scans, positive emission tomography, PET scans, like a CT or an MRI, but it's a PET scan, where you actually can see the physiological activity in your brain. And people that are under stress, and the way they tested them was they gave them really hard problems to do, and they gave the other people, the control group, easy problems. Guess who had the higher stress? The ones who had to do the higher stress. They could actually see the activity in the brain of the high-stress people. Well, that activity in the brain is a manifestation of your stress, which increases your blood pressure, raises your blood sugar, gets your heart going faster. So stress relief is another way of treating your overall health and your diabetes as well. So another thing we like to do is support groups. A lot of people say, well, I need help to control my diet better, or I need help to relieve my stress. So we tell our patients, if need be, go to a stress management group, or with your prayer group, your church group, whatever it is, and you'd be surprised that camaraderie among people helps relieve stress, but it also helps you manage your day better. And you'd be surprised, like I said about the communal dieting, okay? And by the way, I want to mention a thing called blue zones. I forgot to mention that. You might have heard of, blue zones are areas in the world where people live to be 90 to 100 years old. and they live a much stress-freer life, much less heart disease, much less diabetes, much less hypertension. And I saw this for a fact myself when I lived in the Mediterranean myself. And so, for example, there's an island of Chios, and we're in Corinthos, where there's not just octogenarians, there are people in the 90s and 100s. But you look at them and they don't drive a car, they ride a bicycle. They walk on the mountainside, they eat healthy, they eat communally, okay? So that stress management of communal dining, which that book I told you about, the scientific basis of the Mediterranean diet, they studied places like Italy, some places in South America, Okinawa, Japan, these blue zones where people eat healthier. They don't eat vegetarian diets. They eat what's called the Mediterranean diet, even though maybe they're in Japan, but they eat the same way. Much more fruits and vegetables, much less red meat, okay? No sugar. If you ever had Greek coffee or Turkish coffee, they do it what they call sketo. It means no sweetener whatsoever, all right? And by the way, coffee is an antioxidant. It's kind of an interesting thing, isn't it? So a lot of news going on with coffee nowadays, because we know that maybe 2 to 3 cups of coffee a day probably decreases your chance for developing dementia or Alzheimer type symptoms. We don't know why yet, but there's other things in the coffee bean that probably is antioxidants that help reduce that inflammation of the blood vessels of the brain and the pigment that we've now found that's in people's brain that have Alzheimer's, okay? So I'm not against coffee, but I'm against too much coffee consumption because too much will make your heart race and et cetera, and raise your blood pressure. What's the key? 2 to 3 cups, right? A lot of scientific inquiry going on about what's the right amount of coffee. The other day somebody asked me, what about dark roast coffee? Well, I didn't know this until not long ago, that the darker the roast, the less caffeine in the coffee, okay? So people, I like the taste of that, but you're not getting as much caffeine. But when they're roasting out the caffeine, all right, what else are they roasting out? Probably some of those natural ingredients that maybe are good for us. So think about that. This is more to come on this. You're going to see a lot of information about this coming out in the future. A lot of research going on there. All right, so in our place, we keep track, meaning our company has about 90 plus centers, in the United States. And we have, I call them data nerds. I don't like to use that term, but these are IT guys, and what they do is they study all the data that we provide through our electronic medical record. And they keep track of how we treat our diabetic patients. And we show the insurance companies, people who come to us and live with and work with us for about a year to manage their medical problems, particularly their diabetes, they have a much decreased chance for developing heart disease, kidney disease, eye disease, et cetera. And we had the data to prove that. And the insurance companies jump on that because we provide what's called value-based care. And how do they measure value? They measure value by that data that we give them. They glean it out of our electronic medical records. So they look at all kinds of things, and how many diabetics you have in your practice, how many have an A1C of less than 7, how many were you able to get off of insulin? And yes, folks, you can actually get off of insulin if you're a type 2 if you do these things we've been talking about. Control your diet, control your stress, exercise more, and take your medicines correctly. And guess what? Eventually, we'll get your sugar low enough, perhaps, can't guarantee it, but perhaps we'll get enough to cut back your medicine and maybe get you off. And I have successfully gotten people off of insulin, not the type 1s, but the type 2s, okay? So we have the data to prove in our system the way our doctors operate, we reduce the chances for these other health conditions that are related to uncontrolled diabetes. We work on cigarette smoking cessation. We actually provide acupuncture that helps people do that, all right? We send all our patients, every single one of our diabetic patients sees our foot doctor, a podiatrist. And the reason why is because I mentioned earlier that the nerves and the blood vessels of the legs can be affected by diabetes. And you might have heard of called the diabetic foot, okay? So we do every single year, once or twice a year at least, we send our patients for diabetic foot care, inspection of the foot. When people have uncontrolled diabetes and develop that neuropathy I talked about earlier, they lose the sensation on their feet. And more than one time when I used to work in emergency room or in my office up in St. Louis and here even, where I've seen somebody walk barefoot and come into my clinic and say, hey, I got bleeding from on the bottom of my foot, and I inspect the foot, and guess what? There's like a tack embedded in there or a piece of glass that they don't even feel, because the sensation of feeling has greatly diminished because of that uncontrolled diabetes causing the neuropathy. So we ask every single one of our diabetic patients, insulin or not, to examine their feet every single night, wash their feet, examine the feet. Don't try to do your own toenail trimming if you can't, because that's more people poke themselves trying to trim their nails and develop infections. I'll give you one other patient vignette, my mom. My mom was a diabetic from in her 40s. She was overweight, had high blood pressure, was diabetic, and was on insulin from her 40s. She died in her 70s when she decided she wasn't going to do dialysis anymore. She did dialysis for 6 years. But she could tolerate the dialysis. That didn't bother her. But when she lost one of her toes, that got her depressed. Then she lost the next toe. And then she lost the bottom part of her foot, about 4 toes. Then she got depressed, okay? That could all have been prevented had she had gotten better care for her diabetes when she was in her 40s, 50s, and 60s. She died at 73. And it wasn't the dialysis that did it, the kidney problem, it was her diabetes, and she just got so depressed because she said, now my diabetes is so bad, I lost part of my foot. That really, honest to God, killed her. But we can prevent that by good diabetic foot care, the diabetic patient themselves inspecting their foot every single day, every single night before they go to bed, and letting the doctors examine their feet, checking their pulses, and checking for what's called neuropathy. Okay. I think we're just about done here, but I want to open the floor to questions if you have any. In our center, about 40% of our patients have diabetes, as I just showed there. And I said how we accumulate the data that we then analyze, and then we show it to the insurance companies. And that's why they like us so much, because they know that we take good care of our patients. So we work with endocrinologists, with other subspecialists if need be. Even though we have our own cardiologist in our clinic, we, when need be, will send someone to an endocrinologist to help us in the management. But every one of our physicians and our nurse practitioners are expert in caring for diabetic patients. And I mentioned we see the podiatrist. We also send every single one of our diabetic patients to the eye doctor, an optometrist or a physician, to look for what's called diabetic retinopathy. Remember I said earlier, the #1 cause of blindness in this country is uncontrolled diabetes. It weakens the blood vessels, which causes leakage of blood into the back of the retina, and the doctor has to go in there sometimes and do laser therapy, okay, in the back of that retina. So we send all our if you're a diabetic, you need to see an eye doctor at least once a year. If you have diabetic retinopathy, meaning disease in the back of your eye related to diabetes, you need to see that doctor at least a couple times a year, maybe even more often sometimes, okay? Also increased cataract formations in diabetics too. So diabetic foot care with our podiatrists, we use endocrinologists when necessary, and we also do all of our patients send them to eye doctors. This is a given. This is absolutely, we have to do that. And if your doctor's not sending you to an eye doctor every year if you have diabetes, he's not treating you right, folks. I'm telling you that. You insist you want to see an eye doctor if you have diabetes, because only an eye doctor is going to dilate your pupils and look deeper in your eye than a regular doctor in his office can see with an ophthalmoscope. Okay? I think that's about it. I want to open up the questions for folks. When we looked at our data, we looked at our data, and what we saw that a little bit less than a year, our diabetic patients had better cholesterol levels, they decreased their weight, they decreased their blood pressure, and we got their sugars under control. And we did that by education and monitoring their blood sugars. That's what we do in our center, folks. We have 40% of our patients are diabetics over 65, 26% nationally, all right? We tend to get those people who need more help, and we do a pretty good job of that. Okay, so open the questions here. Yes, ma'am. So every one of our physicians is a primary care physician. They're either internal medicine or family medicine, and then we have some that are subspecialists, as myself. But as I said earlier at the beginning, I'm a subspecialist that likes to take care of the whole patient. I don't want to just do colonoscopies. In fact, I stopped doing endoscopies about 6-7 years ago. So every one of our doctors is a primary care doctor, but some have subspecialty. So let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 right now, and 2 nurse practitioners. And by the way, if I didn't mention this earlier, and we have people from Dedicated here today, Robert and Ellen and Tony, they can answer a lot more questions. We pride ourselves in what we give VIP care in a concierge way of treating patients. So some of you probably have heard what's called concierge medicine. The average primary care physician in this country has about 2,500 patients or so. Our doctors have no more than 400 patients. Okay, we have 90 clinics, and the reason why our doctors have so many less patients is because we can devote more time to you. They pay our doctors well. We're not paid by how many patients we see. We get paid by how well we take care of our patients. That's why we call it value-based medicine. So when a doctor has 400 patients, we see everybody every month. We'll say, even if you're feeling great and you don't need a refill, or that, you come in and see us. We're going to talk about your health. We get to know our patients like family. We get to know their family. All right? How are your grandkids? How's that kid up in Georgia that you went and visited last week? We really get to know our patients really well. We see them every month. We try, sometimes more often. I had one gentleman, because he had a lot of conditions going on, I had him in 3 times this week already. Okay? And that way I could keep him out of the emergency room. I mean, the last place you want to go right now in this world is an emergency room where they're just still teeming with COVID. Okay? So we do everything in our power to keep people out of the hospital. Sometimes it's necessary, granted, but by seeing our patients frequently, we get to know them well, we make sure they're taking their medicines right, we're getting the lab studies that we follow, and we educate our patients. So 400 patients per doc compared to 2,500? I mean, you do the math there. The ratio is fantastic. That's what attracted me and the doctors who work there this way. We call it concierge medicine without you having to pay $2,000 a year for the privilege to come see us, which is what, in my hometown of St. Louis, I had 2 concierge doctors across the hall from me. They downsized their practice. Each one of them got $2,500 out of their 400 patients they kept. Okay? And they did concierge medicine, right? Not me, I didn't do that. But those 2 guys did that. And the doctors, the patients had to pay $2,500 a year for the privilege of being there. They still had to pay their co-pays and everything else. Here, we provide better service than that for no copay. Everything that's done in our building, everything, the medicines you get from our pharmacy dispensing, the podiatry care, the cardiologists you see, the stress tests we do, the x-rays we do, everything is covered under our umbrella. You don't pay a penny. Not a penny. And that's what attracts people to come to us, because we take excellent care, concierge, VIP service. Every single one of our patients we consider VIPs, all right? And we provide that at no cost to you. Think about that. This is the future of medicine. This is how medicine should be. And I say this in many talks I do. Have you ever heard the saying that says the future is here now, it's just unevenly distributed? That's what it is. It's unevenly distributed how this should be. And we are the tip of the spear of the future, folks. This is how medicine is supposed to be practiced in this country.
On behalf of the Safety Committee for Gulf Lakes and for Gulf Lakes in general, I want to thank Dr. Nicholas tonight.
Sure.
It's Dedicated Senior Medical Center for the food they put on. They will be back April 5th for another doc talk on hypertension. Thank you all. Appreciate you coming down.